Yeah, I mean, Exhibit A and how the Republican Party lost its mind is probably Senator Lindsey Graham, right, Jonathan? I mean, here was a person, I interviewed him for MSNBC many years ago when his feet were still planted in terra firma. You recently interviewed him. Let's play a little bit of sound from that interview.
There's something about Trump. There's a dark side and there's some magic there. What I'm trying to do is just harness the magic. To me, Donald Trump is sort of a cross between Jesse Helms, Ronald Reagan, and P.T. Barnum. I mean, it's just this bigger than life deal. He could make the Republican Party something that nobody else I know could make it. It could make it bigger. He could make it stronger. He could make it more diverse. And he also could destroy it.
There's just some magic there, Jonathan. And yet P.T. Barnum is no longer in the center ring, and the magic dust continues to float around in the air. What did you learn about the psyche of the Republican Party through that interview?
Well, Senator Graham's quite different from Ron Johnson. And look, I spend pretty much all my, certainly for the last 5 years, before Biden won, talking to Republicans in the House and the Senate. And there are different, if you're going to group members into categories, there are some who, are quite cynical, who will say something privately about Trump and then behave completely different in public. There are some like Ron Johnson, who I actually don't believe is particularly cynical. I believe he believes all of these lies and conspiracy theories. And the reason I think that is because he's just so prolific. You don't go from, 2014, he was warning about ISIS members deliberately infecting themselves with Ebola and coming across, the border. And then, he's an anti-vaxxer. The list is he's basically latched onto a conspiracy theory in almost every field of human endeavor. And then Lindsey Graham is different because there still is some cognitive dissonance there. He clearly is, and that interview I did with him sort of revealed that he basically wants to be the guy who can deliver Trump, which many people think is a fool's errand. He wants to be the guy on the Hill who can be the guy who takes Trump and delivers him for good, So if he wants to try and get an immigration bill, I can be the guy who can get Trump not to kill it or to give it his blessing or whatever. And so he's sort of doing this shuttle diplomacy back and forth between Mar-a-Lago and Washington. It hasn't yielded any fruit yet, and people are pretty skeptical who've been close to Donald Trump for a long time that it will yield any fruit. But this is what Lindsey Graham has this is the role he's assigned for himself in the post-Trump. Well, I don't think you can call it the post-Trump era because Trump still effectively controls the party. But that's the way I see it.
Yeah, he's sort of like a concierge or a fixer. But I think you make a very important distinction, Charlie. There's, as Jonathan points out, this is kind of the corner where craven political calculation and power mongering intersects with misinformation and propaganda. And I think this is such an interesting analysis when we look at Russian disinformation, of which, Ron Johnson seems to be an eager student. The Russian disinformation campaigns have found a foothold in this country, and specifically in the American audience. Ann Applebaum in The Atlantic writes about that, and she says, the Russian security services have now studied us and worked out, it probably wasn't very hard, that large numbers of Americans, not only Fox News pundits and OANN broadcasters, but also members of Congress, are very happy to accept sensational information, however tainted, from any source that happens to provide it. As long as it suits their partisan frames and as long as it can be used against their opponents, they don't care who invented it or for what purpose. Russian disinformation does not succeed thanks to the genius of Russians. It succeeds thanks to the sharp partisanship of Americans. Russian disinformation works because the Americans allow it to work, and because those same Americans don't care anymore about the harm they do to their country. She's writing about the Republican Party right there, isn't she?
Yeah, those last two sentences are really chilling to realize that how many Americans have been willing to pass on this information. And Ron Johnson has been at the center of that, apparently willing to take information from Russian agents and to pass it on, and then of course to deny that he's doing it, which kind of makes him, you think about it, kind of a bizarro Joe McCarthy. Joe McCarthy built his career arguing against, warning against communists and against Russians, and here you have Ron Johnson, who's become a conduit for Russian disinformation. But I agree with Jonathan's point that I do think that by and large Ron Johnson believes what he's saying, and he has that support network that is going to defend him and is going to reinforce what he said. Now, there was one little blip when, and we wrote about this at the Bulwark, when he called the former chairman of the Republican Party from Brown County in Wisconsin and said, of course I know that Joe Biden won the election, but if I say that, I'd be committing political suicide. So that was a little bit of a glimmer that he was being deeply cynical. But a lot of the rest of this, I think he does believe. I think that he has gone so deep down these rabbit holes. I think he's created his own rabbit holes. But again, he's not alone in doing that. I think maybe he's an extreme example. But if you go down into those caves of right-wing disinformation, you're going to hear a lot of these themes. And then, Ron Johnson comes out of that cave into the light of day, and people go, what is he talking about? Why is he saying these things? Where did he get these ideas from? And unfortunately, there's a lot out there. So this is a good indication of what we have to live with the Republican Party and a right wing that is still dominated not just by Donald Trump, but by Donald Trump's approach to the truth.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.